You know what? We were talking during the break about Fraud Awareness Month, and it just passed in March. And it's such a topical subject right now. Obviously, as the economy is more challenging and as house prices increase, you know, fraud is just such a forefront of what I do every day. And there's obviously different types of fraud. There's fraud for profit, fraud for shelter. And we never thought it impacted us here in Atlantic Canada. We would see maybe like one fraud file. And when we say fraud file, we say it's suspected fraud because it's not fraud until it's actually proven in court that it's fraud.
Right.
But we would see one file maybe a year. But it's certainly becoming more and more prevalent here in Atlantic Canada. And I know in Ontario and obviously in the West, it's just rampant, especially when it comes to mortgage lending. Sandy, like what insights can you give us on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. We saw a big spike in fraud for shelter when interest rates were high.
What's that mean, fraud for shelter?
So that means I'm trying to buy my house and I can't quite qualify. So maybe I doctor up my income statement in some way, shape, or form, or some bank statement. So it's usually an individual or a very smaller scale.
Yeah. How often do you see that, by the way? Is that quite? I wouldn't think that's very common. Maybe it's more common than I think.
It is. I wouldn't say it's like an everyday thing, but it is probably more common than you think.
What are some red flags for that?
So really good red flags. We asked the question, does it make sense? So if you
always hear about the cab driver making $200,000 a year.
You got it. You got it. Yeah. And then the other piece is, do all the documents tell the same story? Right. So we don't ask for just one piece of paper when you're, say, buying a house. There is your full purchase and sale agreement. There's proof of your down payment. There's proof of your current income. There's your credit bureau. There's, all of these pieces
Taxation
of paper.
Information.
Exactly. And we, if we're reviewing these all together, you can start to cobble together a story. And when I led an underwriting team, I always tell them, if your spidey senses are tingling, chances are something's up. Right.
So you're saying that people will actually doctor, like Photoshop or whatever documents?
They can get pretty high tech with it.
Is that right?
Yeah.
What percent? And you may or may not want to answer this. Sneaks one by.
I don't know that.
Yeah.
Because,
I mean, you don't know, I guess, unless there's a loss.
Yes.
Really.
Yeah. And it is. I would say fraud for shelter. No, all fraud is wrong.
Yeah.
And illegal, like you could go to jail.
It is 100% illegal.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Where we have an additional challenge is when you have fraud rings. So you mentioned fraud for profit, and that's when it gets really scary, because then it's not just a one-off mortgage. Then it's probably a group of mortgages, and you can be looking at millions and millions of dollars that are at risk.
So what type of organization would be orchestrating fraud for profit?
Organized crime?
Organized crime.
But I mean, is it like, just give me any tangibly, is it a group or is it?
I think there has to
It's
be
usually
multiple bad players involved.
That's right.
Sometimes there could be a mortgage broker, appraiser, lawyer, realtors. It's not just one person creating these frauds, especially if we're talking about something to that scale. There would need to be multiple players involved to kind of pull something like that off.
That's exactly it. Yes.
And sometimes we see files coming from out of province and from, clients we don't know, or brokers are trying to refer to us that we don't know. And we don't do that. Specifically because I want to know who the customer is, and we're really about that advice piece. But I'm sure it happens all the time.
Absolutely.
And you're like, oh, here's a full package of documents. Well, why is the client not calling me directly? It just asks more and more questions.
That's it. The other one is if it's a rush.
Especially we see these ones are closing in 10 days.
Right. And it's
like why?
But the purchase agreement may have been signed like 3 months ago or something. And you're like, well, why all of a sudden is it a rush? Did you really sign a purchase agreement without any conditions and no financing in place?
I doubt it.
And so then you start to ask a few more questions.
Right.
Yeah.
So how bad does the fraud get? Do people actually try and make up jobs?
You can see just about anything.
Yeah.
The most typical is, altering
A little bit.
It's usually the income or down payment, I
You
find.
got it. Yeah, down payment is usually the most common, and then income for qualifying
Well, at
purposes.
some point though, you're going to have to justify that. You're going to have to pony up with the down
Well,
payment though.
if you're misrepresenting, we'll call it misrepresenting instead of fraud. But if you're misrepresenting the down payment, but maybe that down payment is actually coming from proceeds of crime.
Oh, I see.
They're trying to legitimize the down payment and then washing the money to try to make the down payment. It's very, very common.
All right. So what are the rules when it comes to down payment? Because you and I had a conversation. There are some government programs that will assist in down payment. There are lots of avenues for down payments. So what are some of the rules for down payment?
Well, the money has to be in a Canadian financial institution, and it has to have passed kind of all the anti-money laundering rules. So it goes through a suspicious transaction with FinTrack, whatever financial institution it's with. They're going to verify those funds. And so we typically like to see it sitting in a bank account for like 90 days, a Canadian bank account. If it's a gift letter, it has to be from an immediate family member. And the mortgage insurers out there, the default insurers, they define immediate family a little bit differently, but usually it's someone like your mom or dad or
brother, sister.
Exactly right. And it has to be an actual gift. So you can't have to pay me back, after 3 months or something.
Because just imagine if the gift is not a gift and it's actually a loan, that actually worsens your financial position where maybe you have to make a payment on this. And I see this all the time.
Well, how would you police that, though? Police might not be the right term, but how do you monitor that? Because if somebody has a side deal, then you don't know, right?
The big challenge is, so we have our gift letter, and the gift letter clearly, explicitly says this is a gift. If at the end of the day they're like sliding something behind it.
Yeah, that's their. They're going to have to deal with that involved. They're not helping themselves.
They're not helping.
Well, and this
themselves.
is why like lenders like Manulife Bank work with brokers. Like we're licensed in the province of Nova Scotia. We also have to do our due diligence to make sure that we are presenting these files correctly to the bank. It's our job to protect the bank just as much as it's the bank's job to protect themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I would think that's why relationships like yours with your lenders
are very valuable,
because they trust you.
And it's an extra layer of, I think, security and compliance. And that's really why these lenders are willing to pay us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. We're onboarding new clients to you, but we're doing a lot of this work to package these files, make sure they're approved, get them to the finish line, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure it's compliant.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because you know what? We wouldn't be in business if we didn't have lenders like Manulife Bank, for example. If we didn't have Scotiabank, if we didn't have TD Bank, we would not have a business. And that's why it's so important that these bank lenders are here really in our channel. Because there's so many other lenders out there, but a lot of these other lenders are funded by these banks.
At what point do you determine that law enforcement should be involved?
So that is outside of my purview.
Just make it up.
Usually,
No,
it's
got to be a big one.
It's got to be a big one, and I think that's where you really get into the fraud for profit.
The corporate security.
So although it is illegal, if somebody's misrepresenting and intending to falsify a document, generally you'd probably just disqualify them for the mortgage, right?
Yes, we would demarket customers.
You'd exit the relationship.
That's right.
And this may not, but just be like, hey, we're not doing this mortgage for you. We are going to just not do business with you at all.
Right.
Now, is there a portal or something that there's names go, a database that those names go on?
So if it is, say, a broker or an appraiser or a realtor, then yes, there is definitely
Castle.
That's right, and it is monitored. Lawyers, obviously, we are always checking the bar association to make sure that lawyers don't have any black mark. Builders are another one.
Really? Okay,
yes,
I didn't know it.
We can monitor builders.
There's so many, bad players out there, and it must be just daunting from a bank perspective to make sure that the people that you're doing business with are people that you want to be doing business with.
Absolutely.
The reputational risk is just so high. Like imagine if the bank does a mortgage and then there is some reputational risk. That can be tough because the bank doesn't want their name in the media saying, hey, we did these mortgages.
Absolutely,
And I would think that if as times get more desperate financially for people, you're going to see people taking more risks.
Well, and so interestingly, we had higher interest rates, so we saw a spike in fraud for shelter. Now with the uncertainty and everything that's going on with our partners in the South, we're definitely seeing the potential for more fraud coming potentially across the border as well. So I think there's never a time when we can say, oh, we're going to relax.
We're good,
there's no fraud.
We're just opening the floodgates here.
How strident are Canadian rules as opposed to American rules for this type of thing?
So I would say that we are heavily regulated, and we're grateful for that, I think is the best way to put it. In the States, you can have federal regulations, but then you also have state-driven regulations, and I don't think that it is as conservative or as heavily monitored. However, we have seen in the news quite a bit recently about anti-money laundering and things like that. So I would say we have good guidance and partners in the federal government that support us in the guidelines that we should have in place. But it is ever changing. They're using their minds for evil instead of good out there, and it is an ever shifting landscape. Where we're seeing fraud coming in so many different ways that we always have to be reiterating and changing and making sure that we're covering ourselves.
And I think it's hard to manage that expectation from a consumer's perspective. Sometimes I see consumers be like, well, 20 years ago, I just basically got a mortgage with a handshake. I don't think that was true because I was doing it 20 years ago. We were doing it basically
maybe
the same.
40.
40 years ago, maybe, sure.
Yeah.
But, at the end of the day, whatever rules that lenders are putting into place, it's really to protect Canadians from themselves. Really, we want to make sure that this consumer can afford to make their mortgage payments. We don't want the bank to have a loss just as much as we don't want the consumer to have a loss. Buying a home is the biggest purchase of people's lives, and a mortgage is the biggest debt. We want to make sure that they can pay.
Yeah,
and that's why there's this due diligence.
It's so true. And as much as the guidance and regulations and everything else seems onerous, we want to make sure that the customer is not waking up in the middle of the night stressed about how am I going to make my next payment? What happens if I lose this property? That's the last thing that we want. And so we want to make sure we're providing the right solutions and that folks are in a mortgage that they are comfortable paying on a regular basis.
Do you see people sometimes, because sometimes there's multiple people applying for a mortgage or a couple or whatever it might be, whereas one of the partners is doing something fraudulent and the other is completely unaware of that?
That is a great question. I honestly don't know. Typically, if we see something fraudulent, then
they're both on board.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Because that could cause a real problem at home afterwards.
I would think so.
And I think in today's world, especially when we're talking about conventional lending, if it doesn't work with one lender, there's another lender that will likely do it. Even when we're, Manulife's a prime lender, but if it won't work with a bank like Manulife, maybe an alternative lender will do it, like Home Trust or Equitable Bank or something like that. And then a client can get themselves in a position where they can qualify for prime lending again.
Hence, use a mortgage broker.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And I think the majority of mortgages with most banks these days are coming from a mortgage broker channel. And I think that's why it's so valuable to seek that advice. The best advice really does come from a mortgage broker because we can look at that income and the assets and the credit and just put that all together and present it to the lender that's going to work best for the consumer.
Sandy, is there anywhere online before we run out of time where people can check out with your institution some of this good information that we're talking about?
Manulifebank.ca.
All right, it's all right there.
It's all right there.
Well, listen, hopefully you had a good time with us.
I absolutely did, yes.
Yeah, it was a great chat. Thanks for coming in.
We'll
My
need to make sure
pleasure.
we have you back next spring as well, because I'm sure there's going to be some other trends. And, between now and the end of the year, I'm sure there's going to be some changes.
Okay, Sandy, thanks.
Thank you.
If you've liked what you've heard and you want to learn more, feel free to visit us online at teamclinton.ca.